Europe's retaliatory strike, a trade war threatening to cripple the U.S. auto industry. The U.S. EU trade war erupted in March 2025 when Trump imposed a 25% tariff on European cars, triggering a €26 billion retaliation from the EU targeting American goods. From the auto industry to agriculture, energy, and technology, both sides face economic crises, a fractured alliance, and China's rise amid global instability. Opening salvo, the shot heard across the Atlantic on March 17, 2025, a bombshell dropped from the White House that shook the foundations of global trade. President Donald Trump, standing firm in his America First doctrine, announced a sweeping 25% tariff on all car imports from the European Union. The move, pitched as a long-overdue correction to unfair trade imbalances, aimed to protect American manufacturing and lure European automakers like BMW, Volkswagen, and Mercedes-Benz to build on USSOIL. It was a bold play, echoing his first-term skirmishes, think 2018 steel and aluminum tariffs, but this time, the scale was grander, the target sharper, and the fallout poised to ripple far beyond the auto industry. The announcement wasn't a bolt from the blue. Tensions had simmered for years, rooted in Trump's view that Europe's 10% tariff on U.S. cars against America's prior to 5% on theirs tilted the playing field. "We're bringing jobs back," he declared, flanked by aides who touted the policy as a lifeline for Rust Belt workers. Yet, beneath the bravado, the risks loomed large. Economists warned of spiraling costs, industry leaders fretted over supply chains, and even some GOP allies whispered doubts. This wasn't just about cars, it was a gauntlet thrown down to a decades-long ally threatening to unravel economic ties that had underpinned Western prosperity since World War. The second, Europe didn't blink. By March 20, Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission, faced the press in Brussels with steel in her voice. "The EU will not sit idly by as our economic interests are attacked," she said. "Any unjust U.S. tariffs will meet a firm response." That response came fast, a €26 billion retaliatory package targeting American goods with ruthless precision. Soybeans from Louisiana, beef from Nebraska, poultry from Kansas, cotton from Georgia, the list. Read like a map of Trump's political strongholds, a deliberate jab at his Republican base ahead of the 2024 election. This wasn't blind retaliation, it was a calculated strike, echoing the EU's 2018 playbook when Harley-Davidson bikes and bourbon whiskey bore the brunt. The escalation didn't stop there. Starting April 1, the EU planned to resurrect trade restrictions from Trump's first term, paused under Biden, followed by a $19.6 billion tariff wave on April 13 hitting tech, machinery, and more. This was no knee-jerk reaction, it was a declaration of economic war, one that promised to drag industries, workers, and consumers on both sides into a maelstrom. For the U.S., the auto sector braced for a reckoning. For Europe, it was a stand for sovereignty. For the world, it was the dawn of a conflict that could redraw the global economic map. Europe's counterattack, a strategic blow. The EU's response was a masterclass in retaliation, blending economic heft with political savvy. Unveiled on March 20, the €26 billion tariff package didn't just match Trump's car duties, it aimed to wound America where it hurt most. Louisiana soybeans, a $1. $5 billion export to Europe in 2024 faced a 30% duty, pricing them out against Brazilian rivals. Kansas and Nebraska, The Midwest's agricultural heart saw beef and poultry slapped with 25% tariffs, jeopardizing a market worth $2 billion annually. Down south, Alabama, Georgia, and Virginia joined the hit list with cotton, timber, and consumer goods like furniture targeted to pinch rural economies. This wasn't a scattershot approach. The EU honed in on Republican-led states, turning economic policy into a political weapon. Take Louisiana, home to House Speaker Mike Johnson, its soybean farmers, already battered by past trade wars, now faced a fresh crisis. John Carter, a 45-year-old grower from Baton Rouge, stood in his fields, despair etched on his face. "Europe buys a third of my crop," he told a local TV crew. "With these tariffs, they'll go elsewhere. I'm looking at bankruptcy if prices keep falling." His story echoed across the Midwest, where farmers like him, once Trump's staunchest supporters, felt the ground shift beneath them. The strategy bore echoes of history. In 2018, the EU had hit Harley-Davidson, Levi's, and Bourbon to counter Trump's steel tariffs, a move that shaved millions off U.S. exports. This time, they upped the ante, layering in steel and aluminum duties at 25%, hammering states like Ohio and Pennsylvania Rust Belt bastions. Trump had vowed to revive. The EU's message was clear. If America struck, Europe would strike back harder, targeting not just wallets but votes. The timeline tightened the screws. On April 1, dormant restrictions from Trump's first term would snap back, followed by a massive April 13 salvo, $19.6 billion in duties on tech gear, farm machinery, and more. In Iowa, a Tyson Foods exec scrambled to redirect poultry exports, muttering, "Asia's an option, but it's a long shot. China's still mad," from 18. The EU wasn't just reacting, it was digging in for a protracted fight, betting that political pressure in Trump's backyard would force a rethink. For American farmers and factory workers, the stakes couldn't be higher. The U.S. auto industry, teetering on the brink. America's auto industry, a $500 billion behemoth employing over 1 million, stared into the abyss. Trump's 25% tariff aimed to force European carmakers to build in the U.S., but it misjudged a critical flaw. U.S. automakers leaned heavily on European parts. At a Ford plant in Detroit, Sarah Mitchell, a 38-year-old engineer, pored over cost projections with a grimace. "German transmissions, French electronics, we can't make an F-150 without them," she said. "These tariffs jack up every unit by thousands. Switching to domestic suppliers, that's a 2-year pipe dream." The math was brutal. The American Automobile Manufacturers Association pegged cost increases at $2,000, stow $3, $500 per vehicle by fall 2025. A Ford F-150, America's best-selling truck, could leap from $40,000 stow, $43,500. A Tesla Model Y, reliant on European semiconductors, might climb even higher. Dealerships felt the chill fast. "Customers won't swallow this," said Mike Reynolds, a Ford seller in Toledo, Ohio. "They'll hold off or buy used. I'm already cutting staff." If demand tanked, plants in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, key electoral states, face slowdowns, layoffs, and a political headache for Trump. Europe's counterpunch made it worse. Their 25% tariff on U.S. made cars gutted exports. In 2024, America sent 56 billion euros worth of vehicles, Jeeps, Fords, Cadillacs to Europe, a lifeline for SUV and truck makers. Now, a Jeep Wrangler in Berlin jumped from 45,000 to 56,000 euros, dwarfing rivals like Volkswagen's Tiguan or Toyota's RAV4. Paris dealers reported a 50% drop in U.S. car inquiries, within a week. Analysts foresaw a 40% export plunge by December, threatening factory jobs in Detroit and beyond. We spent years cracking Europe, a Jeep exec lamented. This wipes it out overnight. The ripple effects were relentless. Higher costs and lower exports spelled trouble for Ford, GM, and Tesla, each grappling with supply snarls and market losses. Tesla, a tech darling, faced a double whammy. Its European-made batteries and chips now cost more, potentially forcing price hikes or profit cuts. We can't absorb this forever, a Tesla insider warned. For workers like Dave Simmons, a 30-year GM assembler in Flint, Michigan, the future darkened. They're talking furloughs, he said, kicking gravel outside the plant. I got a mortgage. Trump said he'd save us. Not this. U.S. agriculture, Midwest misery. If autos were America's industrial pulse, agriculture was its soul, and the Midwest bore the brunt. The EU's tariffs zeroed in on soybeans, beef, poultry, and more from Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas, echoing the 2018 China trade war's scars. In Iowa, Mary Thompson, a 50-year-old soybean farmer, sat amid a stack of bills, her voice trembling. We just clawed back from China's tariffs, she said. Europe took 30% of my harvest last year. Now what? Brazil's cheaper with these duties. I can't keep going. Iowa shipped $2 billion in farm goods to the EU in 2024, a lifeline now fraying. Nebraska's beef and Kansas's poultry face similar fates, with 25% tariffs pricing them out against Irish or Argentine rivals. Big players like Cargill forecast a 20% revenue hit from Europe, while Tyson Foods eyed Asia, though trade deals there lagged. We're stuck, a Tyson manager grumbled. No quick fix. Farm equipment giants like John Deere braced for a sales dip as farmers tightened belts. Tom Ellis, a 42-year-old Deere worker in Kansas, fretted, no tractor sales, no hours I got kids to feed. The political stakes loomed large. Midwest farmers, a Trump bedrock, wavered as livelihoods teetered. In 2016 and 2020, Iowa's rural vote powered his wins now. That loyalty faced a test. He said trade wars were easy, Mary muttered, staring at her fields. Not for us. The EU's targeting of red states wasn't random. It was a bid to turn economic pain into electoral pressure, a gambit that could reshape 2024's map if the bleeding didn't stop. Europe under pressure, a two-front struggle. While the United States reeled from the opening volleys of this trade war, Europe wasn't spared the fallout. The EU's auto industry, a crown jewel of economies like Germany, France, and Italy, faced a brutal squeeze from both sides of the Atlantic. Trump's 25% tariff on European cars threatened their U.S. market, while the EU's own 25% counter tariff on American-made vehicles complicated operations for European firms with plants stateside. At BMW's sprawling SUV factory in Spartanburg, South Carolina, the air was thick with uncertainty. Employing 11,000 Americans, the plant churned out X3s and X5s, many bound for Europe until now. With the EU's tariffs, shipping an X5 back to Germany tacked on thousands of euros, pricing it out against homegrown rivals like the Volkswagen Tiguan. Hans Muller, the plant's production chief, stood on the assembly floor watching workers bolt chassis together. We're looking at cuts, he told a local reporter, his voice low. Fewer shifts, maybe layoffs. It's not just here, it's the supply chain back in Bavaria too. The numbers backed him up. Analysts predicted a 25% sales drop in Europe for Spartanburg's output, threatening hundreds of U.S. jobs and millions in German revenue. Mercedes-Benz faced a parallel crisis at its Tuscaloosa, Alabama plant, where GLE and GLS SUVs rolled out. A 30% export slump loomed, forcing executives to weigh scaling back, a move that could gut local employment and chill investment in a state already lean on economic wins. The steel industry felt the heat too. In 2024, the EU exported 4.5 million tons of steel to the US, a $5 billion lifeline. Trump's 25% tariff slashed that market, with the European Steel Association Eurofer forecasting a 3.7 million ton loss by year's end at ThyssenKrupp's massive Duisburg complex in Germany. CEO Martina Merz issued a dire warning. "We're trapped," she said. U.S. tariffs on one side, Chinese dumping cheap steel on the other. If we don't pivot fast, we're shedding jobs. Duisburg, a steel town of 500,000, braced for a ripple effect. Smelters idled, paychecks vanished, and local shops shuttered. To counter the squeeze, Europe turned outward. In late March 2025, a Brussels summit buzzed with talk of new trade partners. Volkswagen opened talks with China's BYD for electric vehicle batteries, a hedge against U.S. uncertainty. Stellantis, parent of Peugeot and Fiat, eyed deeper ties with Toyota, leveraging Japan's reliability to offset American chaos. "We can't bank on the U.S. anymore," an EU trade official confided off record. "China's hungry, Japan's steady its survival. If these deals stuck, Europe might wean itself off American markets, leaving the U.S. isolated in a shifting global order." Chain reaction, energy, tech, and beyond. The trade war shockwaves didn't stop at cars and crops. They swept into energy and technology, threatening industries far removed from Trump's initial target, the U.S. A titan in liquefied natural gas, LNG, supplied 45% of Europe's imports in 2024, a $20 billion boon for firms like Cheniere Energy and ExxonMobil. Europe's pivot away from Russian gas after 2022's Ukraine war had fueled that growth, but now trade tensions jeopardized it. At Rotterdam's port, a key LNG hub, manager Peter van Dijk haggled with Qatar and Australia for new contracts. "America's playing hardball," he said. "We need options. Qatar's cheaper, Australia's closer. A shift to these suppliers, or a push into wind and solar, could slash U.S. exports by 20% by late 2025 per the American Energy Institute, costing billions and idling Gulf Coast rigs." Technology, a U.S. EU cornerstone, wobbled too. America's chip designers, Intel, NVIDIA, paired with Europe's equipment makers like ASML to dominate semiconductors. But tariff fallout frayed that bond. In early April, EU lawmakers floated tighter rules on U.S. tech giants, higher taxes on Apple imports, stricter data laws for Google, retaliation for Trump's aggression. Intel's CFO, David Zinsner, paced his California office grimacing. "ASML's machines are our lifeline," he said. "If Europe cuts us off, our fabs grind to a halt. It's a $10 billion hit." Supply chain snarls loomed, with shortages poised to hike gadget prices worldwide. Financial markets mirrored the chaos. Ford stock plunged 8% in a week. Tesla's Toyota's battery costs spiked, and ExxonMobil's dipped on LNG fears. The Dow Jones shed 800 points in late March, a siren for broader trouble. Analysts whispered of a slowdown, industrial output faltering, consumer spending shrinking. "This isn't contained," a Wall Street trader muttered, eyeing charts. "It's a domino effect. Cars today, everything tomorrow." Geopolitical fallout, a fractured alliance, and China's gain. This wasn't just an economic brawl. It was a geopolitical earthquake. The US-EU alliance, forged in war and trade over decades, cracked under the strain. In Beijing, China's leaders watched with barely concealed delight, spotting a golden chance. At a Shanghai trade summit in late March, Commerce Minister Wang Wentao played the steady hand. China offers Europe stability, he said, as BYD and cattle pitched battery deals to Volkswagen and Stellantis. If Europe bit, US influence could erode, ceding ground to a rival in a market of 450 million consumers. Japan and South Korea lurked too. Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, and Kia, entrenched in Europe, stood to gain as US cars like Jeep and Ford priced out. Japan's Auto Association eyed a 15% export bump by 2026, with Hyundai planning a Czech plant expansion. America's loss is our win, a Toyota exec grinned privately. The West's unity frayed, further NATO talks grew testy, climate pacts stalled. We're drifting, a German diplomat sighed. China's thrilled, Russia's watching this, could shift everything. Uncertain future, resolution, or ruin. April 2025 loomed like a guillotine, with the EU's next tariff wave set to strike. A prolonged war risked recession US. Car prices soaring, Midwest farms failing, European steel towns darkening. Consumers felt it first. A BMW 3 Series in Chicago jumped $5,000. A steak dinner in Omaha cost more as beef exports tanked. EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic flew to Washington in late March, seeking a truce, but left empty-handed. It takes two to negotiate, he told reporters, frustration clear. Trump dug in, touting American strength, while von der Leyen vowed no surrender without U.S. retreat. History loomed as a warning. The 2018 U.S.-China trade war bled farmers dry, shifting soybeans to Brazil. The 1930s Smoot-Hawley tariffs deepened the Great Depression. This clash, pitting allies against each other, dwarfed both in scope. Trump banked on rallying his base, but Michigan auto workers and Iowa farmers, his 2016 and 2020 backbone, grumbled as jobs and incomes teetered. Europe aimed to hold firm, but its own industries bled. The world watched, breathless, as diplomacy teetered and chaos beckoned a trade war. No one could truly win.